exactly.
Yeah, I don't think we need to.
Because that's a
We'll let
real
people do their own
world.
research.
All
Because
right.
we're live, right?
We are live. Very cool. Welcome back, everyone. Again, this is Zach, the less good-looking, less intelligent Matt. Matt's too busy running 50-mile races. He's got a 100-mile race coming up, so he's got to save his energy with the talking, so I'm in on this. So today, we are going to be talking about getting your pitchers back in on a short rest. So as usual, we got Jordan Ryan here, our professional, intelligenter pitcher type guys. So guys, pitching on short rest. So first off, if someone's coming in, what is your guys' definition of a short rest? So if someone pitches next day, is a certain amount of pitches, what is your definition of a short rest?
I mean, like for me, it's having a pitcher, who's had a suitable amount of volume, right? Let's just say a starter, and you're in a crucial point in the season where you require them, because they might be your best pitcher, to help you win. You're in the regionals, you're in the playoffs, and that to me, we have the Pitch Smart guidelines, and that gives you some indicators in terms of your rest. But now we have an analytics approach with our platform to be able to say, you know what, you fit the criteria, on my end. And I don't know if Jordan, you got anything else to add?
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said there. And if I was going to throw it into like a definition of this is the semi-armchair official stance, is if you are a college or high school pitcher, pitching on short rest would be anything shorter than that normal 7-day rotation. And if you don't know what I'm talking about on a 7-day rotation, we have a ton of stuff where we go over that. Check those other videos. We also have a whole course on setting up a 7-day. And if you're a starting pitcher in pro ball, that would be anything outside of that 5-day rotation, sometimes a 6, depending on off days. And as if you're a reliever, that would involve going back to back or pitching less than every 72 hours. So that for me is how I would define short rest, kind of across those giant age ranges. And also at the youth level. In my mind, if you're on something other than a 7-day rotation that's compressed within that on a tournament, that would define as short rest as well.
Gotcha. Makes sense. So right now you guys spoke about days pitching. Will you alter this short rest definition based on pitch counts? So say, you got some kid or a reliever, something like that. Because you do see relievers every so often coming in on short rest, it seems. If their pitch count is down, would that short rest criteria then be altered in any way, in your guys' opinion?
Go ahead, Jordan. You can start with that one.
So for me, the pitch count is not as important as people view it to be. It's all for me how they respond to said pitch count. And I always go back to this criteria. Is we had an athlete who was training in the Northeast. He was a freshman in college. It was at a Division III. And on his game day, he pitched. It was a sim game. He threw 20 pitches. He took a break, and then he threw 20 pitches. And that sim game was 4 hitters, 5 pitches to each hitters. And then from that point, he lost roughly 7% strength, 6%. I forget the exact number. Not a taxing outing. 7 days later, he does his fresh exam. He's gained strength. He's at a very good point. His coach repeats 20 pitches, break, 20 pitches. He loses 23 or 27% strength. I forget. So the pitch count was the exact same. The setup was the exact same. The internal workload of how his body responded, completely different. So for me, if you're going to throw a guy on short rest, number one, it has to be a non-taxing post-exam. It has to be. Number two, at least by day 3, that athlete has to be fully recovered. If he's not, then it's out of the question to pitch that guy on short rest. So there's a whole lot of things that come into play of when to throw that guy on short rest. And, Ryan, I don't know if you want to add into that or not.
I'll tell you what, man. I was a college coach at the University of Buffalo, and they had a team. I wish they brought it back. But we had an electrifying Friday night starter. And in order for us, to be able to be successful, that Friday night starter had to come in as a closer on Sunday. Okay. And at the time, there wasn't the same concern that, we're talking about back in, that maybe 2009, 2007 to 2009. It was just before the 2012 boom when we had all these injuries. 2012, we started getting higher velocities, a lot more injuries. So the concern wasn't there. Okay. And thank God our pitcher was healthy, didn't get hurt, and was drafted by the Blue Jays, ended up getting hurt with the Blue Jays. But if you take a player here, it's Friday, guy throws 100 pitches, right? The way we use the analytics, especially for a mature athlete, is evaluating their post exam. So they could throw 100 pitches and they could have very minimal fatigue, right? You have to check the arm fatigue. And then we give them, they have 1 day rest. And what we have it allocated is that on 1 day rest, you're able to get 30 pitches in. So for example, if I pitch on a Friday, I got a day rest Saturday, Sunday, I'm pitching, and you get 30 pitches is what we're looking at. And in terms of better managing your pitchers, you're doing a recovery test on Sunday where they're coming up to close and it doesn't show up well. Well, now you have the opportunity to pull back the reins and say, hey, he's not ready. Maybe you got to throw him, if it's a tournament, like a regional, and you're having games that are stacked, maybe we wait a day and we throw him then. But it gives you the opportunity to win. It really does. And the way we're talking about this, it's not like we're flying blind, right? When I was a college coach, we were flying blind. It wasn't about worrying about this arm. It's like, we got to win. This kid has, the stuff. We get into a high leverage situation and we need him in there. Okay. So that we can win the game.
Yeah.
Now there's just no guessing. You can assess the whole situation.
Yep. You said that perfectly. Yeah, I mean, back in the day before we came out with these assessments, people, like you said, you got to win. You want to win. The kid wants to win. He's feeling good. And if you don't have that ability to test that pre-throw, that post-throw, to see how he actually is on that short rest, that makes a huge difference. So our pitch count, pitch strong guidelines that we've talked about for a long time, there's sections in there to help people understand, identify on a short rest. So we actually have a actual qualification for data-led decisions for pitching on short rest. So through our actual programming and into our one of our profiles that Jordan and Ryan both put into our programming is to actually see how this short rest can affect based on your age, how many days you pitch, how many pitches you have. So it's great that the arm care programming can actually help coaches in identifying this. So the coaches have the arm care. They're getting these guys on a possible short rest. So I have a question for you, Jordan. If you have a two-way guy and say he's a shortstop or center, someone's got a high throwing position, is there a short rest for a position guy going to pitch and then back to position? Is there a connection between those?
Oh yeah. And I've never dealt more with two-way players than I ever have in my life right now, because in high school, everybody's basically a two-way player. And now that I'm back into the high school side of things, one of our more talented arms was also an infielder, but he was a freshman and, good throwing freshman, had a good year, but I had to sparingly use him based on the amount of reps. I had to pitch him at the end of a week. And the reason for that was because he could not come back on anything other than a 7-day rotation. That was the only thing he could do. And he would throw on a Friday. We'd have to limit his pitch count because he wasn't, he was highly fatigable around 60 pitches. So for that guy there, I had to be very, very cautious with him, as opposed to I had a sophomore who could get to that. Our state has a 110 cap. He would get to 110. He would be like 7% strength loss every time. He'd be recovered by day 3, no issues going there. Whereas the other guy just couldn't recover. So I had to be sparingly on how I would use him to make sure he could still make the throws from third base or shortstop the following week coming up. So we always had to be very cautious on those. So to me, managing a two-way player is almost like they're pitching on short rest every single day. And you have to be extremely cautious of it because they're throwing a lot more than people realize.
I'm working with, and so is Jordan. We're helping out this young man who's a college two-way player. He's in the college summer league. He's a left-handed reliever, and he was an outfielder. And to make it easier on his arm, we brought him in to become a first baseman. We actually taught this kid how to play a really good first base. And it takes some finagling, planning. It's tough because sometimes going into relief can be sprung up on him. But when you have a two-way player, if you can have a process and schedule them, just kind of what Jordan said, you're getting a fresh exam on them. It's like, if they had a high throwing load, made a lot of plays, right, the day before, and the next day you want them to start. Well, again, you got the data. So when they go to test their arm on game day and you're like, oh boy, that he's lost a lot of strength, you're changing the plan, you're scaling back. And sometimes if you're starting to see like alerts, that are purple, which is our warning, you might want to push him. Okay. However, you might get him and his arm's supercharged. And honestly, don't hold back the reins. Neurologically, he's connected. Okay. And that's a problem too, because you can have this two-way guy and you're not using the strength data. You're not testing on game day and you're not testing after these high intensity events. I know there's a question about this. Someone's posting a question right now about when to test, but fresh exam before mound days, bullpen mound at least, and a post exam after. And you can be even more frequent than that. You can get used to their 24-hour recovery and just tell them, do a fresh exam the next day. You're not going to pitch, but I want to see a bounce back. But you can really undertrain a throwing arm. People think like, oh, we're in a world. It's like, hey, let's pull back the reins. Let's stop all this insanity of overthrowing, right? But then on the other spectrum, we're taking so much away that the kids may not be getting the conditioning. Guess what happens? Okay, the pitcher throws. This guy's like good for 50 pitches. He's good for 60 pitches. All of a sudden, it's a crucial game, and he's going to throw 105. He's going to like go up over 100% of his previous workloads. That jump is what causes a lot of fatigue, and that causes a lot of stress and strain, right? So we have to have a data-led approach. Now, with this kid at first base, we have a throwing program for him that's a pitcher throwing program. The guy does infield. He goes through a throwing program that a pitcher would do. He's trained as a pitcher. He keeps his capacity, and we keep him on a schedule to test his arm and play him first base. I've mentioned in a few other lives, we get these guys to at least start the inning by throwing the baseball, not just underhand rolling it. So they're feeling like they're actually throwing, because they might not have a throwing play. Right. So that's also something that's pretty important about the whole mix of the two-way player.
Gotcha. But it is doable. It sounds like you guys, you have dealt with it and it is doable, which is great. But the difficulty to be able to do that effectively without the arm care sensor and the strength would seem to be pretty difficult. I know you guys have probably had to deal with that in the past before, obviously our system came out. So being able to test strength pre and post, obviously would be huge for short rest guys. So
I'm going to touch on these questions we have coming in real quick. So we have one from a guy, Colin Chappell. Hopefully I'm saying that last name. It's either Chappell or Chappelle. I don't know. So sorry that if I'm butchering it either way. I figure if I say both, I'll cover my bases. But he's talking about how he pitched 40 pitches on Monday, then 97 on Friday. He said his arm was sore for 4 days. So I don't know if I was sore from Monday through Friday, or I was sore for 4 days after Friday, from Saturday, Sunday, Monday, back to Tuesday. Either way, the context from what I'm hearing there, if you're sore, like if you're sore, you don't know the difference between stiff and sore, is you probably have either a weak arm or a strong arm that's highly imbalanced from what I'm hearing there. Those are two pretty common things. Or you have a bad SVR. So you may be good relative to your body weight, but you're really weak comparatively to your velocity. And then after that, it's saying, when should we, and you're just not recovering. You're highly fatigable and you're not recovering, is what that sounds like to me. And then he's saying, when should I do a fresh and post exam? So number one, you're not going to do it too much. You're not going to do too many fresh and post exams. That's one of the questions I get, especially if you're a guy in that context that you're saying, hey, I have a sore arm. Well, err on the side of knowing too much about your arm. I would rather you test 7 days a week, or any day you touch a baseball, do a fresh and a post exam. The fresh exam dictates what you do today. The post exam dictates what you plan for tomorrow. That's the easiest way to put it. But in a nutshell, in a minimum, every time you're going to either long toss or touch the mound, do a fresh exam and a post exam. And then how do you tell when you're recovered? Just simply click the recovery tab button at the top right of the screen. If it's in a positive, probably looking pretty good. If it's in a negative, you're probably not recovered. that's a 30,000 foot view. I don't know if you want to add more on that, Ryan, or if you want to kind of keep rolling on this here, but
Yeah, I know, and it's pitching heavy, right? But the other thing too, because a lot of people who are on this are coaches. You got to make sure that you have a strategy for your position players, right? We basically said anytime that a player's got a high intensity throw day, you want a fresh exam before, because you're just looking at what muscles are not performing, and if they're all performing really well, then let them eat. And then the post exam also helps us schedule for the next time, right? Velocity enhancement programs, whether you like weighted balls or you don't like them, they can be made safer. Okay, the data driven approach to velocity enhancement can be made safer by these regular testings, and also testing. I like testing the next day, so I like a fresh exam before, I like a post exam after, and a lot of our guys, I get them to do another fresh exam the next day, because now this puts us on a recovery cycle. You might not know what your players are doing. We're looking at Colin's situation coming back, and some of it just could be that the recovery strategies aren't there. Maybe he doesn't have a circulation plan. Maybe there's not an anti-inflammation plan, coming from nutrition, not by pills. There, so that this gives us as coaches, as players, some kind of information of, I need, what works for me. The device is not just a performance device. It's a scientific device to test things, test your products. I go through a lot of products. I test them. I know which ones work for players, which ones don't. And that's also important too. Sometimes, maybe it was ice, at that, maybe back then ice was a big thing, icing your arm, and, icing your arm constricts blood vessels, right? And you might not know and say, hey, I'm going to try not icing my arm. And then all of a sudden, the next time you do that recovery test the next day, it's either the same or it might even have gone up in some players. It's pretty interesting. Everybody responds differently.
Yeah, just to touch on that is we get a ton of questions. Almost every live stream, someone's like, well, what do you got on Mark Pro? And I think it's great. It's not, I've seen it really help guys, and I've seen it actually fatigue guys neurologically. So there's some guys that I use it with. There's some guys that I say steer away. Same with other devices like Compex. There's some guys that it's fantastic for. We have one of our pro guys that, responds extremely well to Compex and Mark Pro. And he actually uses it almost roughly 4 days a week. I have some other pro guys that don't respond well at all to it. So that's where it's so important to test and understand, because maybe the beetroot chews are all you really need for your recovery, and you don't see any type of added benefit from doing the arm bike. Maybe beetroots and arm bike is your perfect combo for increasing that blood flow to speed up recovery, but you don't know unless you're testing it. And that's where it's not a one size fits all. Generalization leads to hospitalization. And that's the big thing we got to get across is if you're just trying to generalize program, and Ryan says it all the time, generalization leads to hospitalization.
And individualization leads to optimization.
Optimization. There you go. And the big thing I want to get across is just because you saw someone do it on YouTube does not mean it's the right plan for you. And that's where you have to test, you have to dig, you have to understand these things, because just because this big leaguer did something does not mean that it's going to work for you. And for anyone who's ever met us at the ABCA or knows me and Ryan, met us in person, we're two different body type individuals. I'm short and stocky. Ryan's tall, right? So we're two very separate body types when it comes down to it. There's no way that we're going to respond the same way to, the same nutrition, the same training plan, it has to be individualized. And that's where testing comes into play.
That's great. Yeah. And so we can kind of go back into our pitch count guidelines. So you're saying the criteria, you and Ryan are very different body types. But what criteria, almost even specifically to age groups, would you guys recommend can and have the ability to be on a short rest versus others, maybe younger players or weaker players who can't be on a short rest? Is there a criteria? Because I know.
Oh yeah.
Do you mind if I take that first, Ryan? Because I may have to hop off early.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Just because I have another meeting popping up, and I just want to throw something out there in a real world example. So for me, in terms of that short rest, is you have to be physically mature. I think there has to be a point where you don't think this player is going to go through a random growth spurt. They have a good foundation of arm score, SVR, shoulder balance. They're showing that they can recover well. And to give an example, I have a player who's also a catcher. He's a catcher and a relief pitcher for me. He also plays a little outfield. He does everything. He's a journeyman. So right now in our summer program, we're very structured on when these guys are throwing, how they're doing things. And he was actually pitching on a Wednesday. So he went bullpen Monday, pitched on Wednesday, did his fresh exam Friday to try to get him another bullpen just to see if we could get one going. He was actually setting a PR on strength. So on a one, it would be technically his day two. On his day two, he set a really good fresh exam. And I gave this player the option. Do you want to throw a 20-pitch bullpen or do you want to throw a 20-pitch live? And he said, I'll do the 20-pitch live. I want to use that. So I gave him the option to throw on short rest if he was comfortable doing that. But the numbers dictated that he could. He had low fatigue on that Wednesday outing. He had high recovery on Friday. So for me, he was checking the boxes. Now that player is going to be 17, so he's a little older on those age ranges, but I would not give that option to a 12-year-old, for instance. I just wanted to jump that in there in case I got to hop off early, Ryan.
Yeah, I want so that there's no element of question. Physically mature is 18 years old. Okay. Now there's research to talk about the elbow not being physically mature until 26 years old, but in a traditional sense, the growth plates start to close and solidify at 18 in everywhere in the body, probably but the arm. And there's other things, other layers to this outside of that, right? So the other thing is that the timing of the season, you're not going to want to pitch guys on short and rest. And we did it in college, like very frequent. But we don't want to do that unless it's in a critical time point in the year. And we generally say reserve this for the playoffs, because the last thing you want to do is get in a routine. And then especially, if you're not testing, you're in big trouble. You're putting yourself at risk if this is something you're doing early in the season, because you could burn an arm and it could be gone for 18 months, right? So you have to be pretty strategic, critical point in the season, kids 18 or plus. And then there's some other elements that you really need to understand. On the app, we now do the individualized pitch counts and we look at all these different strength metrics. And there's one component where a player needs to be strong arm certified. Okay. So they have certain strength measures. They have an arm score of 100. Okay. They have a strength velocity ratio of 2 or higher. So that means they have 2 pounds of arm strength per miles per hour. So they have great neurological function based on the arm speeds that they're able to handle. They can't have any injury history, no alerts. They don't fatigue and they don't have recovery issues, right? So it's not like we're just tossing them in blind. There's other criteria you got to really know about, okay, to be able to do this. For, case in point, they get out of the game, you test the post strength and they're beat, okay? Even if you test the recovery score the next day, you still know there could be some neurological carryover and you might not want to be able to, you might not want to put them in, okay? We want to see all blue in the app and then have this strong arm qualified score. So that's, that's really important. Okay.
Yep.
The feedback, and we also have this too. I mean, everybody's like super motivated. You take a college kid, especially one that's good, one's draft eligible, critical points in the year, and they're probably not going to say that they don't feel great. That's why you got to test them, because you're going to actually have data to match what the feel and real is. But now when they have a great strength data, create an open window for your athletes to say, hey, come tell me how you feel, because especially you're a sophomore and we need you, for your junior season. And I don't want you going in there if you're not feeling great. So they got to also communicate, hey, my arm scores, the way the way they're subjectively rating them in the app are pretty good. And they are communicating that they feel, good.
Yep. That's huge.
The only thing is we don't want to have back-to-backs. We don't want to go, you don't want to throw Friday and you come back Saturday. That's something that we don't want to do with, a starter then becomes a closer. We got to have a gap in there to at least give us a little bit of time to reduce some of the inflammation. And it's interesting because kids don't know that their arms are inflamed after pitching, and they don't know what happens to their nervous system after pitching because they don't feel any burning. They don't actually feel pain. It's not creating pain or soreness. Some of the residual inflammation, because you need some inflammation to grow muscles. So
Yep.
we have all these safety checks, our community, they need to get around, and they need to learn, the app, and just stop worrying about, like, just guess, stop guessing. We don't need to guess anymore. We can assess that thing, right?
Yeah,
and
we took the guessing out finally, which is great. And
take the
you ripped through a
guessing
whole
out.
bunch of you ripped through a whole bunch of information. So everyone listening, everything Ryan's going through is on our pitch count guidelines, which you can actually get on our website. So if you guys go to
Actually, I see a
armcare.com,
link too. There's a link posted. Yeah.
boom, love that. There's a link. Our man in the back, Matt's figuring the links out. You can click the link, or if you go to our website, you can go to the footer and you can actually click individual pitch counts. And all of our information we're going over today is going to be on that. So it'll go over kind of what Ryan was saying, the requirements that he and Jordan designed that require, that we recommend, that qualify to be able to hop on a short rest. And there's some that don't. Like you may be some stud and you think you're strong and everything, but there are those guidelines that we have identified that wouldn't be a good idea to hop on that short rest. So. And then we also have Jordan. If you're still on and rocking, we want to hear a little bit more. One of the main standards we have is our Armstrong qualification. So basically, something that your testing and your results have proven that you can do it. Can you go over that a little bit for the people listening? So when they're on that pitch count guidelines, they know what to look for.
Yeah, so what I'm going to do is give a brief kind of overview of it, because I may have to hop off here in a minute or two. But we basically have this big chart that starts out from over here all the way down to the bottom right. It's a big square that you can find, and it's just going from weak arm to as you get stronger as you're going in these different quadrants and corners. So if you have a high SVR, if you have low fatigue, if you have a good arm score, your shoulders balanced, you're checking all the boxes in our muscle groups, you always never have recovery issues, all those things are going on, you have what we call strong arm qualified, which means you can actually throw more. And it's taken a lot of time to put this stuff together, and it's holding up through not just, our visual, our anecdotal stuff, it's holding up in real world representation. And we've had a whole bunch of groups that have reached out, and we have actually in the post game thing, you can find that linked on our Instagram, where the pitching coach from UConn was talking about how they bounced the guy back on the 1 day rest. Again, not a back-to-back, a day one, which a lot of people get angry. And everybody knows who I'm talking about. We have specific guys that reach out. Oh, you said he was going on 1 day rest on day one. Yeah, he pitched after day one. It's pitch, day 1, day 2, day 3, so on and so forth. If we don't understand that, you need to understand 5 and 7 day rotations and what day one actually means, because there's no level after high school baseball that does not use a 7 day or a 5 day rotation. We have to understand that. So, they're using that information, and this guy was strong and qualified. So he had low fatigue on 124 pitches. Saturday was an off day for him. They tested him on Sunday, and he was fully recovered. So therefore, they used that starter from Friday, pitched him on Sunday, 1 day's rest. Day one, pitched on day 2. So we need to understand those 7 day rotations and how they work. But that player was strong arm qualified, and it's just another real world example of how those things line up. I'm going to pass it over to Ryan, just because I may have to hop off here soon.
Yep. I mean, the whole thing is, we can't be fearful. And I think that's one thing that our company is doing pretty incredibly, is that we're showing people evidence that there are athletes that have a really strong arm, and you're going to see that too with relievers. We have a bunch of relievers that when they look at each of their muscle groups after they come out, some of them throwing 30 pitches and they pitch 2 innings, it's over 100% of their baseline tests. So that means they're getting stronger with their pitching. We can't always think that our athletes are going to be fatigued by pitching. You're going to notice you got some that are going to have minimal fatigue. And for you as a coach, that's when you start to scale your team and understanding, okay, who are my workhorses right now? Who are my guys that have really super strong arms? Can I get an extra inning out of my starter because he's strong arm qualified? And we basically add on, that's something else. I know we're talking about short and rest, but we add on another inning. Because what happens is that you can look at the other guy and say, hey, they're underperforming. I might have a guy that's fatigued that week, or they're not recovering. And so, the big deal out of that is you're given a chance to strengthen those other arms, right? And now you're going to have just more horses that are going to be available to you. And that's why you got to use the app. You really do. And as an example, there's a soundbite that we had from Josh McDonald, right? Who's at UConn, won assistant coach of the year. I can't remember Jordan, was that 22, one of those years. Yeah,
one of those years. Yeah,
22. Really bright guy, right? And we went in and we educated UConn. We do something called an accelerator package for colleges, where we go in and we onboard them and we really get into the weeds. And he used the device. He got into really understanding it, managing his bullpen, managing his starters. He had one that I think, so I don't mess it up, I think he threw over 120 pitches, and he then came back on 1 day rest to help them win in a crucial point of the season. And that's because he tested them. He tested this starter. And they were in a regional. So it can be done, and nothing happened to the kid. So we can't worry so much when we have data. You're led by data like you're going to a doctor, right? And you worry about having diabetes and the doctor says your blood sugar is so low. Don't worry. Okay, you reach for a chocolate bar maybe once in a while, but we have we have this process now where stop being fearful, right? And we have the checklist for you. We have those qualifiers to tell you when your athlete has a super strong arm. Obviously this doesn't make sense for an 11-year-old who's got a developing arm. We have to be, we have to use some common sense, but we also should be investing in a technology and process that we're customizing everything. And now we have reactive approaches and proactive approaches, okay, to our programming. Proactive meaning we're testing before, and reactive meaning when we understand afterwards, we know how to line up our week.
That's great. And so, yep, I like that. You got to risk it to get the biscuit, as I always say. So one last thing before we head out, Jordan, especially. Ryan, you said it. Short rest should be reserved for critical game situations. So, Jordan, you've coached for years, different levels. As a coach, do you already have it in the back of your mind, like I'm preparing this guy for a short rest, or does the games go on? You're like, oh, man, I think okay, maybe this guy needs a short rest, or are you pre-planning for a short rest based on your game situation?
So I'm going to look at that one through the college lens because that's where you have the most leeway to throw on short rest. Now, when I was coaching in college, pitching coach, I 100% prepared specific guys for short rest. We had a couple guys, we had 3 key relievers. And one thing that kept us in a lot of ball games and winning games was, we had I think 3 of our offensive players in 1 year all played AAA or big leagues. They were all, we scored runs in key scenarios, but we also had 3 relievers that we could rely on and 3 really good starters. So all we knew is if we had a lead by the 7th inning, I could rely on one of these 3 guys to either give me 2, maybe, and then have someone else throw an extra one here and there if we really needed it, or have them all go 1, 7th, 8th, and 9th. And then I could bounce them back on short rest if needed because we prepared them to do so. Now, we didn't have dynamometry, so at that time we were flying blind, but we were doing stuff like pH testing to see if they were acidic. We were doing a whole bunch of other things that aren't as efficient, but we still had ways to try to figure it out as we went. So 100%, I prepared guys to do it with bullpens, the way I played catch, the way they trained. Long story short.
I'd assume that's exactly right. Yeah, the coaches have an idea who's going to be going on short rest.
And not to sound like a jerk, But I knew if there's about 4 guys that if I had to use them on short rest, we're losing that game anyway. So I was that guy. If the coach was throwing me on short rest, the game was not recoverable at that point.
Like, let's throw Jordan there. We're not winning this one anyway. I love that. That's
time
awesome.
to punt.
All right. Yeah, I get that. All right. So yeah. So let's just end it. Short rest can be done. Can be done with position players, which is huge, especially two-way guys. It can be done relievers, closers, obviously super quick. Starters special, but again, you guys say in a critical game situation, you're doing it at the beginning of the year, something's wrong. And you definitely have to pay attention to that workload and testing. That pre-test, post-test, fatigue test is going to come in huge. So Ryan, this people who are coming in and they just want the end all be again, all this information can be on our website. And we have the link on here as well. But Ryan, if for the coaches who are preparing guys are now feeling a little bit more comfortable to be able to throw guys on short rest, what is the schedule with the dynamometry and the arm care system for them to do it efficiently? What would you recommend?
Yeah. So, you definitely want to be able to, with starters, okay, you want to test them on bullpen days and game days. Now, if it comes to relievers, at certain levels, they could be going back to back. I always like them to test within 48 hours because sometimes we have a reliever, he pitches, and then all of a sudden, maybe he's off the next day, but we got to test the following day. And the other thing too is if you got a back-to-back guy, right? Try to test the day after pitching, in case you go in again. All right. So every 48 hours, if it's scheduled in, a lot of minor leaguers, they give certain time frames. But when it gets, back to back and guys have to be ready and it might be a little bit more chaotic, if they pitch one day, hopefully you're testing before, you're doing your fatigue after, you do your recovery test the next day so that you can inform the coach that you can go back to back. In rare circumstances in the playoffs in Major League Baseball, I have some players I work with. They test 3 days in a row, if they have to come 3 days on, and it happens. So that's important for relievers. Now, position players, I want you to know those things too, because we talk about pitchers, but if you lose a position player, a great defender, like a shortstop, and he's out for the season, that's going to put a lot of stress on your pitcher. And I state that, you should try to get those guys on a Monday after a Sunday, because you might be traveling in and out, try to get a feel for how their arms are recovering. Okay. And if you're seeing in a position player, their arm's not looking too great, right? Give them 48 hours, test them again, just to make sure. And then redesign your programming. Remember, it's all about taking the data and creating these customized programs. And position players too, like they have a hard pull down day. They're an outfielder. I was an outfielder. I did a lot of distance throwing, even more than a pitcher. You definitely want to have that fresh exam and that post exam. And you're saying, okay, well, we did this for like 12 minutes. I had you out to 275 feet. You're ripping throws off. It's like, hey, we got another hard throwing day on Wednesday. We're gonna tuck that down a little bit, give you some recovery, okay, and then scale back up. Use it strategically for position players too. And then we have this other component called the arm primer. So in between high intensity throwing days, it doesn't mean that you back off, you do nothing. When my guys are throwing 60 to 90 feet, they're doing an arm primer, which is a 1-minute test. They're half kneeling, they're pushing forward, they're pushing back to see all the force that's going from their core region, their trunk, and their shoulder. It's really quick to get an indication whether there's overall fatigue. And even those days that are low intensity, might be throwing 60, 90 feet. You might have them come in, throw at 60 feet, or you might not have them throwing at all just to recover. So there should be 0 days without some kind of an observation.
Perfect.
Okay. And it's all in our courses. It's all in our courses. It's in our Maximizing Arm Care course. You don't have to take our 10-hour certification, which is a certified arm care specialist, but you can take our Maximizing Arm Care course, and it will walk you through a lot of key information in 45 minutes.
Correct. Yep. And being able to do short rest much more safe, much more efficiently is I think it's going to give those coaches some comfort and the players too, knowing that they have our arm care system and that it's not just how they feel or what they think is going on. You actually have literally, like you said, data led numbers to prove that you are okay to go on this short rest. And or if you're not, if you're feeling like, hey, no, I got it, coach, there's something that internally that our information and actual data will show you it's not safe. So so coaches out there, if you've ever done it, if you've ever had kids on short rest and kind of questioned yourself without using the dynamometry system that we have, highly recommend, as these guys have shown, that this can make it an easier way. It takes some load off your guys' shoulders of how to make sure you can efficiently and safely get your players on a short rest, whether it's pitchers, two-way guys, you name it, and all through different age groups as well. And again, we got a link on here. If you don't have the link here, if you miss us, if you go to the Arm Care website on the footer, you can click on that pitch count guidelines, and everything we're going over today is on there. If you have questions, reach out. Ryan, Jordan, or I, or Matt can answer those questions. So we appreciate everyone listening. Ryan, anything you want to send people home with before we go?
No, we got so many questions we didn't answer. And for those of you who you didn't have your answers on this particular live event, please email us. We don't want you to be flying blind. I know there's some on tournament schedules and different pitch count regulations for different tournaments. We want to make sure that you have the best information and that you don't have any mistakes in your programming.
Yep, exactly. Please reach out anytime if you guys have questions. Otherwise, we'll guys seeing you here for more live streams coming soon. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Jordan. I know you're probably out, but Ryan, appreciate it as always, all your intel. We'll be back soon.